Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Navy League's March Special Topic Breakfast. I'm Luke Lorenz, Director of Government Affairs at the Navy League, and today's moderator. I'd like to introduce to you Navy League National Executive Director Mike Stevens, retired 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, who is with us today to introduce our speaker. Sir, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Luke, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We're excited to welcome our special guest, Rear Admiral Gregory Harris, Director of Air Warfare Division N98 for the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. And General Dynamics is pleased to sponsor this special topic breakfast. These events provide meaningful opportunities for industry and thought leaders to hear from and interface with senior defense leadership. The Navy League is honored and privileged to organize and host this most important event. Now to our special guest. Rear Admiral Gregory Harris was designated a Naval Flight Officer in May of '89 and a Naval Aviator in May of '93. Harris's tours include U.S. Special Operations Command, Commander, Strike Force Training Pacific, OBNAV N3, N5 as the Deputy Director, Air Sea Battle, N98 as the Carrier Strike Group Aircraft Programs Branch Head, Commander, Naval Aviation Warfare Development Center, and Chief of Naval Air Training. Harris became Director of Air Warfare in August of 2019. Admiral, we look forward to your remarks this morning, and over to you, sir.
Well, good morning, Mike and Luke. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to speak to the Navy League. Great opportunity, and awesome that we're still able to do this virtually and enjoy each other's company during breakfast. So again, thanks for having me here today. I thought I'd start off a little bit just by ensuring that my webcam is being shared successfully, which I believe it is now. And start off by talking a little bit about the future air wing.
Sir, if I could just mention, I think your webcam just, oh, here it is, it's back on. Sorry, sir.
No problem. It keeps prompting me to share it, so I'll stop sharing it now that it's shared. We'll start with today's future air wing. Significantly smaller, shouldn't say significantly, but smaller than it was perhaps back when some of us first started out in the 80s, when we had typically 90 aircraft up on the flight deck. Now we're looking at a little more like 66. We used to have 60 strike fighters between the A6s and the Tomcats up there, A4s as well, and A7s. But now we're down with our 44 strike fighters, all looking at predominantly Super Hornets for the Navy. We just finished our last cruise with the Legacy Hornet with the Marine Corps, and now that squadron will be transitioning into the JSF. We are coming up, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here in our future, for our first F-35C Lightning cruise, which will happen this summer. And VFA 147 has all 10 of their aircraft ready to go. They've been working up as we normally do, with 5 weeks just completed on board the USS Carl Vinson, which is the longest amount of time we've had at sea for any F-35 to date, which went very, very well. They're completing their final workup milestones, but I will say that all of the signs that were coming out of Air Wing Fallon, the performance of the Air Wing with F-35s involved, and the performance, in fact, of the most junior pilots in that F-35 squadron were really, really encouraging. I'm very excited about the capabilities that the F-35 is going to bring to our Air Wing. Also, as we move forward, we know that the Air Wing evolves over time, and I think a lot of you are familiar that in the amount of time that Enterprise was serving for the Navy, which is a little over 50 years, she had about 55 or 57 different type model series operating on her flight decks, which just goes to show why large deck aircraft carriers are so critical and so useful for our Navy in this time frame, and has been for many, many years. In fact, I've always commented and laughed to think that my very first carrier, which was the Midway, did very, very well in Desert Storm, pound for pound, delivered as much ordnance as any other carrier. And she was right at the end of her service life when I joined her, and the aircraft that I flew and the aircraft carrier I flew off of are now a museum in San Diego, which probably means I should be a museum piece in the not too distant future. But it does highlight how the air wing and the carrier need to evolve together. As we move to more net-centric warfare, we start to work on manned and unmanned teaming inside the air wing. We'll be bringing the MQ-25 on in the not too distant future. We'll talk a little bit more here in just a second about her, and we'll continue to work on live, virtual, and constructive training, both on the carrier and off the carrier, to be able to give us the best opportunities to give our aviators the training that they need in a great power competition environment. And we'll be able to do a lot of that in locations where our adversaries don't have the opportunity to watch and see what we're doing and learn from us, which I think is incredibly important. As we continue to evolve the air wing, we'll start to bring in next gen air dominance and our future vertical lift platforms. We'll talk a little bit more about future vertical lift here in a little bit. But for next gen air dominance, we are looking to find a replacement for the F-18 Super Hornet that will be starting to come close to its end of life in the mid-30s. So we'll have to have a game plan for what aircraft will take her place on the aircraft carrier. The key to the air wing of the future is that it's the cornerstone of the 11 most survivable airfields in the world, are nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, which have unparalleled speed, maneuverability, survivability, and agility. So that capability is incredibly important for our Navy. Talking briefly about the MQ-25 Stingray, our first unmanned platform to be coming out onto the carrier. It'll be really the lead for all of our manned and unmanned teaming. We've used unmanned platforms on the carrier before. We did the UCAS-D demonstrator, so we've proven that you can take off and land unmanned on the carrier. We've proven you can tank unmanned, but we haven't operated, and I think people sometimes don't understand how difficult that challenge is of operating in and around in a carrier with other air wing aircraft each and every day, whether that's in the stack overhead as you're departing or recovering, and then just in and around the carrier and all the procedural things that we do to stay safe. MQ-25 will bring up to 3 cycles of gas for us in a recovery tanking mode. And then it's also, other primary mission is to be able to give 14 to 16,000 pounds of fuel at 500 nautical miles as a strike tanker, a mission tanker. And then there'll be a little bit of ISR on the initial instantiation of MQ-25, and we'll grow that capability over time as we mature the manned and unmanned teaming on the carrier. I touched briefly on it. The Rotary platforms, our MH-60 Romeos and Sierras are reaching their service life limits in the late 20s. And we are working on what we're calling Future Vertical Lift Maritime Strike, which is a family of manned and unmanned systems, which will be a key component of our distributed maritime operations. We are early in the stages of doing our development for that. We recognize that early and consistent industry engagement is important. We've had a number of successful industry days held, going all the way back to November, to try to update stakeholders and gather the data that we need to support our material development decision and initiate our analysis of alternatives, which will kick off here in the fall. And there is a lot of commonality across OSD with the other future vertical lift programs that are out there, but we recognize that there are different missions for the Navy, different challenges we have, in particular, the need to be getting on and off our surface combatants, whether that's our destroyers, our future large surface combatant, or FFG-X. So we'll try to take advantage of as many of those common areas we have, particularly with the Marine Corps as they go after their MUX MALE, their medium altitude long endurance system, and where we can find those commonalities, we'll take advantage of that to drive costs down and to increase commonality across all of those pieces. We talked about the F-35 coming up here this summer. We talked a little bit about the rotary wing aircraft. Let me go back to MQ-25 Stingray just for a minute. We've been very successful with that aircraft. Boeing's T-1, which was their test demonstrator, Just had the refueling store put on her over the early spring, and we've been flying that aircraft out at Mid-America and very successfully starting to knock down some of the data points for that vehicle. Probably the best part has been that partnership again with industry, where we've been able to get air vehicle operators out there to be the co-pilot, if you will, getting experience with the aircraft before we bring that into the fleet. That has been incredibly valuable for the aircrew and also for the maintainers to be able to get a look at what that aircraft could be like for them. Another big question we usually get is Ford. How is she doing? She's just completed her 18-month post-delivery test and trial with a little over 7,800 launches and recoveries executed, significantly contributing to the CSG and pilot readiness. She has been our predominant carrier training aircraft or carrier qualification aircraft carrier over about the last year or so. My son, in fact, one of the folks that got to go out there and get qualified on Ford, said it was absolutely spectacular. Plenty of space for him to drive around and not hit anything, which was good. They've done a lot of work with the delivery of ordnance, over 30,000 pounds of inert ordnance moved and loaded using the weapons elevators. So all of those things that we want on Ford are coming together nicely. We've got 7 of the 11 weapons elevators delivered, with about 90% of all the work remaining on those elevators completed. And that's been a good news story. We'll have the full ship shock trials coming up this summer, a significant event for the Ford and for that class. We're doing it early to make sure that there are no concerns. Don't anticipate any at all. We just had a meeting yesterday to talk through that, and the planning for that full ship shock trials are coming along very successfully. And we'll be excited to get Ford out and get her employed in the 22 timeframe, and then look for a full deployment shortly after that. Another question we get fairly often is about the double pumps that we've had for the deployments of CVNs. And I think important for folks to understand that as we look at the long range scheduling for the carriers, some of those double pumps are planned. What we're trying to do is balance out the load of aircraft carriers across the global force management process. So some of those double pumps are in fact scheduled and planned. What gets you are the unknowns, which is okay because that gets into dynamic force employment. And when we have a need, the nation, president, leadership decides they want to have a carrier in a region to provide presence, whether that's in the 5th Fleet AOR or the 7th Fleet AOR, we have the ability to extend, and we've done that for Nimitz most recently. In fact, we've done it for Nimitz a couple of times and some other carriers where we've kept them out there for upwards of 10+ months on cruise, which some people would look at as a negative. We would always like to have our cruises lengths be consistent for our families and for our sailors. But I think what it really highlights is the versatility of our sailors and the versatility and strength of our families and the versatility of the aircraft carrier, that we have a weapons system that we can move around the world as we need it, when we need it, and where we need it, that is ready to operate the minute it arrives. So I think when we have opportunities to take advantage of those capabilities on the carrier, we need to do that. We do have some high presence COCOMs. As we mentioned, 5th Fleet has a tendency to be a large user of the carrier until that region begins to settle down. I think we'll see a carrier presence there for a while. Another question that we get pretty frequently and came up over the last summer and fall as the Navy did its future naval force structure analysis, and we looked at how a large deck aircraft carrier would be utilized in that future force structure. There was dialogue and discussion about what we would or wouldn't do if we decided to design a light carrier. And I know there's a significant number of pundits that say that a light carrier has a presence out there and an ability to be out there. I believe the L-class ships operating with the F-35B fit that bill. Others would disagree, and that's okay. I think the beautiful part of any study is that it'll take the most current data, and we'll go ahead and do this as a result of the future naval force structure the Navy committed to executing an analysis of alternatives to look at what a light carrier or a follow-on carrier to the Ford class might look like. We did just finish Ford's study, an extensive one that looked at over 70 hull forms before it settled on Ford. And I would say that the majority of that study is still very valid. Some of the mission sets may have changed slightly, so a look at those in light of the current threat out there in the world is valid and not unnecessary. So it'll be good for us to do that. But I'm confident that over the long run, we'll find that there's not a compelling return on investment to make a smaller carrier just as a result of the speed, station keeping, the air wing that you would put on the top of that carrier, and the ability to have the fuel for the air wing and for the carrier, and perhaps the surface combatants that are moving forward with that aircraft carrier. So we will execute that. We're going to start a little bit of pre-AOA activities this summer, and then we'll look to kick that AOA off probably in the 22 timeframe to go ahead and formally revisit that. Another one that's been out there a little bit, and I'll talk to and happy to answer any questions on, is the work that we're doing down in Sinatra to tweak the way we do pilot training. Many of us trained the exact same way that Sinatra is training now. You go into the squadron, you get a giant stack of books, you take the cardboard cutout out, and you create your cockpit at home to do your emergency procedures in your chair flying cockpit. And we were all successful doing that. The times, though, have changed pretty significantly, and the capabilities are out there to have small, low-cost / no-cost trainers for these students, whether you're using something like an Oculus Rift goggle or something like that. The fact that you could look on a device, whether it's an iPad or a phone, look down and see your cockpit, do the procedures, and move all the way through the cockpit with your iPad or tablet in your hand is very powerful. And so we have issued the students iPads with all of their publications on it, all of their checklists. It allows the squadron to put out all the standard things you would for notices and everything else for the students every day that they check in. The squadrons have pushed over to some low-cost trainers, not all of it, but a segment of it where we're doing what's called deep repetition as part of pilot training next for the Navy, which has been given the name Project Avenger. The first class at Sinatra just finished up about 2 weeks ago with Project Avenger. And it really enables the students to move through the syllabus a little bit more rapidly and a little bit more consistently. And so we'll continue to monitor the performance of those students as they move into the fast jet training for us, the advanced jet in both Kingsville and Meridian. And then follow-ons to Avenger will be Dauntless and Corsair, 2 other segments, which will include our changes to our strike fighter pipeline and changes to our rotary pipeline. And we're taking advantage of the fact that Sinatra is recapitalizing across all of the product line, if you will. We just completed the advanced helicopter training system and selected the TH-73. And we'll be bringing those online here at the end of this year. For the first new helicopter we've had a significantly long period of time. We're working our way through our multi-engine trainer replacement. And at the completion of that, we'll look for a planer for our undergraduate jet training system. And that will really be where I think we may make some moves to kind of reduce overhead. Sinatra is a high overhead enterprise. We'd like to cut down on the overhead in that place so that we can push that TOA, our top line obligation authority, towards more lethality and get after that. So we'll see what comes out of a replacement for the T-45 as that system ages. And so with that, I will pause for just a moment and see if there's any questions that you have right now or areas that you'd like me to delve into a little bit deeper, and happy to answer any of those.
Well, sir, let me go ahead and begin by thanking you so much for spending your time with us today and providing us with your insights. We do have a few questions that have already come in, so if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and dive right into them. Our first, I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I just said not at all. Go ahead, sir.
So our first question, I think I might have to divide into two parts. It's a little extensive, but let's give it a shot. Retired Vice Admiral Matthias Winter asks, can you expand upon the Navy's plan for next generation air dominance? Will it be an actual platform or aircraft, and will it be manned or unmanned?
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. I appreciate it. NJAD, as we look at it right now, the next gen air dominance is a family of systems, which has as its centerpiece the FAXX, which may or may not be manned platform. It's the fixed wing portion of the next gen air dominance family of systems, but we truly see NJAD as more than just a single aircraft. We believe that as manned-unmanned teaming comes online, we will integrate those aspects of manned and unmanned teaming into that, whether that we, euphemistically refer to it as our little buddy, is an adjunct air-to-air platform, an adjunct EW platform, discussion of could it be an adjunct advanced early warning platform. We'll have to replace the E2D at some point in the future, so as we look to what replaces that. But as it stands right now, NJAD Inc. 1, the FAXX Inc. 1 is the replacement for the F-18E and F. We're going through the study portions of what Inc. 2 will be to replace the E-18G Growler. And we expect that that family of systems will be a combination of manned and unmanned. Right now, notionally looking at driving towards an air wing that has a 40-60 unmanned manned split, and over time shift that to a 60-40 unmanned manned split. So to try to drive an air wing that is at least 50% or more unmanned over time. Again, a lot of that's going to be dependent on the success we see with the MQ-25 Stingray and our ability to truly learn to operate around the aircraft carrier and safely execute that both on the flight deck and then airborne.
Thank you, sir. And to complete the Vice Admiral's question, for industry competition, will it be winner take all, or is an industry teaming concept being considered?
Absolutely, an industry teaming concept being considered. We're in the just started the concept refinement phase. As we do that, we're working closely with our Air Force counterparts on their next gen air dominance platform, recognizing that the two will likely be different as far as outer mold lines, just based on the different services needs. But a lot of the internal mission systems will be similar, an open mission system architecture and our government reference design that will enable us to use best of breed. So if you think about it, a contractor may have a particular sensor. Let's just use the radar as an example. And over time, perhaps the performance of that radar isn't what you want, either from a sustainability standpoint or purely from a capability standpoint. With that open mission system architecture, you have an ability to more rapidly replace that without getting into vendor lock. And we've seen vendor lock create problems for us before. We firmly believe that competition will give us better reliability, lower sustainment costs, and lower the overall costs. And I'll comfortably say it because I said it to all the primes and the others that were in the room when we kicked off NJAD for the Navy at about a year and a half ago, is that I thought industry should look at different ways to team. Our industry primes get very comfortable with the folks they've worked with in the past. Some of that's worked out very well for us. Other times it may not have worked as well as we would have liked. And I just recommended they broaden their view and look at as many of those folks as we can to team. We also think this will enable a lot of the smaller companies to be able to work into niche markets that they may be very successful at. Hopefully that answers your question, Admiral Winter.
Thank you, sir. And I think that those recommendations on teaming concepts will be very transformative. Our next question comes from Ernest Snowden, who asks, what are the future plans for the MQ-4C procurement beyond 2022?
So MQ-4C, we have procured all of those platforms that we're going to. We're excited that Fire Scout's out there operating in the fleet today. We're doing well. Again, another opportunity where the Navy is learning about manned-unmanned teaming off our surface combatants. there's a lot of there, and the lessons that we learned from Fire Scout and her integration into the fleet will certainly feed into our future vertical lift replacement. But we have procured all the MQ-4Cs currently that we intend to, and we will move forward with that program.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Rick Burgess from Sea Power Magazine, who asks, how long does it take on average for a student strike fighter pilot to get his or her wings?
That's a great question, Rick. And what I'll say is right now, it's too darn long. We have had significant delays over a number of years inside that program. Flat out early, we underloaded the program because we were having difficulties. And so we did not pull in enough aviators, which led to some of our strike fighter pilot shortfall that we have right now. We also have had a number of different issues associated with different aircraft inside the series. So obviously everyone is very aware of the T-45 OBOGs issue we had, where we had the pause for a period of time while we got after corrective actions on the T-45. As we made our way through that and started pushing back up production in the T-45 line, we went through some hiccups with our T6, where we switched vendors for the supply side of the T6, and that caused perturbations down in the primary training. We have managed to make our way widely through the T6 piece, very successfully operating down there and pushing students through aggressively into the helicopter syllabus. And now we're getting all cylinders cooking on the strike fighter syllabus. Another area where we were having some problems was in the FRS, particularly the West Coast FRS, just was having readiness issues prior to the move to 341. As we drove to mission capable rates of 80% or greater, that helped to alleviate the pressure on the FRS out there in Lemoore. We have that FRS now moving at full speed. So from beginning to end for a strike fighter pilot, it should be roughly 2.5 years. It's taking 3 years and sometimes a little bit more to get those students through. My son took much longer than I would have liked him to get through. In fact, just winged last week, but they had one of the first students, T-45 students, completed in the same class with my son last week, and she was right at the 9.5 months that you would expect out of advanced jet training. So she moved through the initial pipeline in T6s at the appropriate pace, and then she pushed through the strike fighter pipeline in 9.5 months.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Charles Hatau. Apologies if I mispronounce your last name, Charles. Asks, can the Admiral comment on the progress of Naval Integrated Fire Control, Counter-Air, and Project Overmatch from N98's vantage point?
In this forum, about all I can say on NIF, Naval Integrated Fire Control, Counter-Air, and Project Overmatch is that they are very much informed by each other. Naval Integrated Fire Control, Counter-Air continues to move forward. We continue to expand the capabilities inside that program, but Overmatch and Admiral Small's team are certainly a part of that. And you know, I've just started to hear some better descriptions of Overmatch and just a different way to think of it. Again, unfortunately, not able to do it in this environment, but it's exciting to see what's coming with Overmatch and how Overmatch is informing all of our cross-functional teams as we start to build up our POMs for FY23 from each of the resource sponsors. But from an N98 standpoint, I would tell you that Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air is very healthy and moving forward very well.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Jim Dahlberg, who asks, can you elaborate more on Naval Aviation's near-term live, virtual, constructive training plan and future roadmap?
That's a great question, and one that I get a lot, and one that is near and dear to my heart, because Fleet Forces Command is the live, virtual, constructive lead for the Navy, and as it trickles all the way back down, the dot ended up on my forehead to be the lead for live, virtual, constructive training inside the OpNav staff. So it is near and dear to my heart as we get out after that. Probably the biggest piece to identify is that there are already pieces of live virtual constructive training that we do within our enterprise. One example would be T-45 training for our naval flight officers down in Pensacola. We have a system called VMTS, which is a virtual mission training system that enables our NFO trainees to go through air-to-air intercepts without having to have an adversary. The Bandit is just displayed synthetically, and so the student is able to exercise that system with someone on a ground station as well. So clearly virtual constructive training that is executed there. We have a lot of work that's been done up in Fallon to get after the virtual constructive training there that will eventually become live virtual and constructive training on the Fallon ranges. But we have gone to a full multi-level security system up there in Fallon in 2 new buildings that will enable portions of the air wing and in fact portions of the strike group to train together. That has been done on a smaller scale in a smaller facility up there. Very successfully. Apologize for being somewhat vague, but again, at the unclassed level, I can't share all of it. But the fact that we'll be able to train the entire air wing from planning, briefing, executing, debriefing, all at the multi-level security environment with our adversaries in there, having the debrief and the replay with data that's coming off the range that is encrypted is really important for us. A key enabler to that is the TCTS system or TICS. TICS 2 is coming. First flight, if it hasn't already happened, is going to happen here very shortly. That pod, which has multi-level security inside it and an encryption system, is kind of the backbone of our live virtual constructive training that we're looking to have. We are working aggressively to bring that program forward and speed that up. We'll see the first testing of that will go towards Beaufort just because of the training range that is available there and the systems, and then we'll move that up to Fallon so that we'll be able to go through air wing training with that. Our longer term roadmap has a vision where we will actually be able to train Comp2X like environments for the full NIF suite of capabilities on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in the FDNF, over in Japan, and in mid-pack, so that we'll be able to do training all the way across. Another key component of that is DMT, which are the some smaller trainers that we'll put on the aircraft carrier for our air crew to do out there at sea. Again, with multi-level security, some changes that will be made to the ready rooms to incorporate that multi-level security and to turn the ready rooms into temporary secure working areas, or TSWAs. And that's about as deep as I can get into that one.
Thank you, sir. I think we have a pretty good idea of what appears to be a pretty ambitious training plan. Thank you for sharing that with us. Our next question has to do with the Triton program. Could you tell us a little bit more about the future of that program and procurement challenges that may be coming down the road?
So for Triton, boy, the biggest thing for Triton is the good news that we're getting. She's operating out of Guam right now, and we are really excited with what we have learned there and the growth that's going on in that program and the early operational capabilities that we've seen. So first and foremost, excited by what we're seeing out of Triton. With the Palm 22 pause and the delay and the funding issues, I can't go into the future procurement of Triton because that's still up in the air with the funding right now inside of Palm 22, but we did take a pause in 21. We have 19 air vehicles that are currently in our procurement, as well as some air vehicles being procured by our international partner, Australia, on that particular platform. The one thing I can tell everyone is that we will support and maintain those 19 air vehicles at a minimum as we continue to move forward. An absolutely incredible capability that the fleet is looking forward to having in a full operational capability in the future.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Jordan Woolman from Inside Defense, who asks, what is your level of confidence in the Navy's unmanned plan that was recently rolled out? What lingering concerns or questions do you still have?
I'm very confident in the unmanned plan, to be honest with you, and that may be jaded by the confidence that I have in the air portion of that plan. but I'm a firm believer in all of the unmanned capabilities that we're trying to bring forward. The challenge for all of us will be very similar, and it'll come down to the networks, the reliability, sustainability, resiliency of those networks. I think the beautiful part is with Overmatch out there and Admiral Small's team really putting a laser-like focus on all of that. And from Admiral Kilby's point, that we have a cross look, much like we did with NIF, Navy Integrated Fire Control, a look across all of the pillars to ensure that we are not putting a burden on our N2N6 organization for the networks that they're not cognizant of, that we all look through a single stovepipe and say, I need 2 lanes of the 10-lane highway for my system, and somebody else says, I need 9 lanes of the 10-lane highway for my system, and how do we manage to share that highway? Having a better viewpoint across all of those pillars, which the unmanned campaign plan will give us, will ensure that the networks and the resiliency of those networks is there. All of our platforms are going to have some similar challenges for them. And a lot of that gets into what we see each and every day with just cars that drive themselves. People think it's really easy, but the logic that goes into those cars is fairly simple. It assumes that what it sees is truth. So I pull up to a stop sign in my unmanned car that is or my manned car that's driving me, because I'm sitting in it, and it sees a red light. It assumes that if this light is red, that light must be green. And when my light goes green, the other light must be red. It does not suppose that the people have chosen to drive through the red light and still hit you, or that in fact the lights are all red or all green. It only knows what it knows. And yes, they continue to learn, but those interactions in an unmanned plan, if you just think about the complexity of the rules of the road for a surface vessel, those challenges are out there. We have successfully moved vessels all the way around the world following those rules of the road, so it can be done. We know with our experience with Triton, our experience with Fire Scout, the earlier experiences we have with the UCAS demonstrator and with MQ-25 right now, that we can execute unmanned off the ship. We just have to get down to the rehearsal piece of operating in and around all those other aircraft. In fact, it may not be the unmanned aircraft that makes the mistake. It may be the manned aircraft interpreting what the unmanned aircraft is doing incorrectly. The other piece of that, when you get back to the networks, is when you are operating an unmanned aircraft in close proximity to a manned aircraft, particularly for something like tanking, there's a lot that goes into that from a resiliency, a safety, and a reliability standpoint that we need to continue to work out. I'm incredibly confident that we can do it. I'm incredibly confident we can move beyond just that to the unmanned teaming piece, where I can give my unmanned friend at least a set of plays to execute. I could have 15 or 20 preset things that I want that aircraft to do. If it was an unmanned wingman, there may be a set attack plan, defensive plan that I want to execute, and I should be able to enter it, execute play 1, boom, go. And whatever play 1 is, that unmanned platform executes play 1, whether that's fly in formation, fly in defensive combat spread, offensive combat spread, all of the things that we do in a fighter world. I believe we can push our way down that path in a very controlled time frame moving forward.
Roger that, sir. And what you just touched on is absolutely fascinating. Those rules of the road, those assumptions that go into any type of unmanned platform, whether it's for military use or, as you mentioned, just an unmanned vehicle. Would love to talk more about that, but our next question takes us back to something you touched on earlier. Could you tell us a bit more? What is the way ahead for the next generation rotary wing aircraft, sir?
So again, that analysis of alternatives is just kicking off. The exciting part for me on that one for future vertical lift, for a while, the Navy and the Marine Corps requirements were starting to diverge a little bit, particularly with respect to the unmanned portion of that system. The Marine Corps has kind of converged back on a size and a weight. So the size of the aircraft, the weight the aircraft has to be able to carry, the distance, speed, range, all of those requirements have converged back into a package that is more likely able to be operated off of a surface combatant. For the Navy, it's very important that we have lift capability going off and onto our DDGs, our cruisers, and our follow-ons to those aircraft or to those surface vessels. So that is at least one of the limitations that we have, a DDG-sized hangar space for our future vertical lift. With that convergence of requirements, that starts to open up some trade space for how the Navy and the Marine Corps look at it. We were looking at our unmanned portion being farther out to the right and our manned portion being the first instantiation. I think we're actually going to flip that on its head. We'll take a look at the unmanned portion first so that we can marry up with our Marine Corps brethren and get after that aspect of future vertical lift earlier.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Mallory Shelbourne, who asks, you mentioned next generation air dominance. Will there be a family of systems for the replacement of the Super Hornet platform, and will they be manned or unmanned? And when does the Navy need to decide whether the Super Hornet replacement will be manned or unmanned?
So the decision on the manned or unmanned replacement will come through the concept refinement phase, which is where we are right now. And that concept refinement phase and the teams that we have with our prime air vehicle vendors will start to advise what's in the realm of possible. Has autonomy and artificial intelligence matured enough to be able to put a system inside an unmanned platform that has to go execute air-to-air warfare? I think air-to-air warfare is one of, if not the most complex ones to try to put into a autonomy. Yes, we saw the computer that beat the guy in the F-16 in a simulated environment. A couple of things I will point out there is that that computer knew exactly what the energy state of the other aircraft was in the simulators. That's one of the assumptions that it had to have to be able to fight. So knowing what the state of the other aircraft was, i.e. energy state, how fast, how high, how slow, the AI was able to execute that fight. In the real world, that's something that a pilot is making a judgment on as he watches the other aircraft maneuver. Did he go high? Did he go low? How many times has he gone high or low? What am I seeing as far as the rate at which the nose is turning? Am I seeing differences in the nozzles to know if they're at idle or at mill? All of those things that an aviator learns as they learn how to do air combat maneuvering or ACM are things that we're going to have to figure out how to, one, sense in the unmanned platform, and then two, react to. That will take some time. Having an unmanned platform out there as an adjunct missile carrier, I see as not a step too far too soon. I could have an unmanned friend. I typically say a flying Dorito chip when I'm thinking about it. Doesn't have to be that way. An unmanned system with missiles, I can clearly, in my mind, envision a way to say, fly in defensive combat spread, shoot on this target, and I will squeeze the trigger, or I will just execute or enable that unmanned platform to shoot the designated target. That doesn't stretch beyond my realm of imagination. When I have that unmanned platform making decisions on which target they want to shoot on, it wants to shoot on, that's where I start to have that stretch both from a policy standpoint and what's the rule of order for the world going to be when HAL is out there executing a strike on itself. I jokingly look at all the movies that are out there. They typically don't end well when we do that. I think a pretty long look at Asimov's 3 laws of robotics are probably pretty important as we move forward in this unmanned piece. But in the next probably 2 to 3 years, we'll have a better idea whether the replacement for the F-18 ENF will be manned or unmanned. I would believe it will most likely be manned, but I'm open to the other aspects of it. But the family of systems will definitely include manned and unmanned systems.
Thank you, sir. And believe me, I could take this conversation in 100 directions with your references to Stanley Kubrick films and to Asimov literature, but we'll try to stay on target here. Sir, you mentioned earlier that industry engagement is going to be very important in producing a more distributed manned and unmanned fleet. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and where and how industry can be most effective?
That's a great question. And I'll just share an experience I had yesterday with one of our aircraft vendors, and I'll use the aircraft piece because it's easier for me, but all of these would certainly apply to any realm, whether it's the surface or subsurface vendors that we have out there and their platforms. As we're looking at what aspects we want on our follow-on to the F-18, speed, stealth, range, payload capacity, all of those aspects have give and takes as you build out the platform. I may need to have to, I quite definitely would have to exchange some range for payload if I wanted a manned system. If I have a manned system, the life support itself and the human itself has weight, and that weight could be converted into gas, which could be range or radius, or you put the human in the loop and you might lose a little bit of range. That's okay. Those are the trades that we're going to make, but early interaction with industry, particularly when you get into some of the other aspects of it, one of them for us is the angle of attack as we come back to the aircraft carrier. Does the man need to land the plane on the aircraft carrier, or the woman need to land the plane on the aircraft carrier? Clearly the answer to that is no. But the other question is, who is going to be the man or woman inside the plane that lets Hal land every time? That is a different question. We do that right now with ACLS. We'll let George take us home, and that's fine. But again, when you get into the reliability, the sustainability, survivability of those systems, how do you then get there if there's a break in that chain? But where we pick up the lens when we land, the angle of attack, the range at which the pilot says, I have to be able to see the Fresnel lens at this point to be able to execute a recovery, is pretty well defined. We know we would like to at least be picking up the meatball by 3/4 of a mile, if not a little bit earlier. Well, if I knew I could have a really good approach, would 1/2 a mile be soon enough? And that may make a difference in the angle of attack that that aircraft has to present. And that difference in angle of attack could change what the outer mold line looks like and could affect stealth capabilities, perhaps on that carrier, or range, or speed, or G, all of those things that go into it. Early dialogue back and forth with the vendors gives you an opportunity to decide what trade is worth what. And when you do that across all of the vendors, you're advantaging each of them. So if vendor A is able to, AOA makes no difference to them because their design, their secret sauce allows it to do something, that's great. But if you've reduced that for somebody else, maybe they get a little extra. It's because their secret sauce is that good. And so I think when we have those industry engagements and dialogues and touch points with industry each time, it's better for us.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned earlier as well about the commonalities between the Navy and the Marine Corps in terms of needs for future weapon systems. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the future weapon systems, I think, are relatively easy. I mean, we clearly all want a similar air-to-air missile, whether that's short range with our AIM-9X or medium range with our AMRAAM or follow-ons to AMRAAM. It's what, not so much in the weapon systems per se, but how you're going to get those weapons there. The F-35 Bravo does have some current limitations as far as internal carriage and limitations as far as weight, just because of the V-stall nature of that aircraft. But I don't think those are overly limiting for that platform. Numbers of weapons is a limitation for that platform, but not necessarily what weapons we have on it. Where I see the difference is as they start looking at their future vertical lift or their MUX mail capabilities, their medium altitude, long endurance system, where those requirements start to change, what payload do they want to be able to carry to support their EABOs, their expeditionary air basing options, as they're moving around and trying to be dynamic inside a threat environment. The fuel, the ordnance that they need that system to carry to their front end platforms and personnel will adjust what we, the Navy, need to be able to get on and off board. One of the ones that I found intriguing is that the number of small packages we move as a Navy that are less than 40 pounds or less that could be moved with a Amazon-like unmanned platform from our sea lift ships over to our surface combatants. I don't have to necessarily do all of that with an UNREP system. Clearly, we're not going to be using thousands of small drones out there, but the fact that you can do some of that in a faster method, maybe less expensively than the huge future vertical lift cost might be, that's compelling and something that's definitely worth looking at. And one thing that Admiral Kilby has given me as a task is to try to figure out how we move this smaller family of unmanned air vehicles underneath one umbrella so that we have, for lack of a better word, a menu for people to check from, that I needed to do this much this long, here's this system. And as I work my way down through the menu, we have some commonality across all of that. It's difficult because of the proliferation we have of small unmanned systems across a wide variety of our naval service.
Well, sir, I wish you luck with that task. It sounds difficult, but obviously very important. We have one last question, sir. This comes from Michael Van Giem, who asks, would you please elaborate on challenges and mitigations for needing to leverage industry-independent research and development investments given security and classified access requirements?
That is a great question. It is probably one of the more difficult things that we do, trying to get teams from industry on board for some of these new platforms and get their computer systems up to the security level you need, and then get their teams read in the right number, the right style, the right breadth, the right locations. Very challenging for our industry partners. For us, we are blessed to have N9SP, a great team there, our special programs branch that just, they work hard at helping us enable industry to do their jobs most effectively. That teaming inside the high nines, critically important to us. And you do have to have that. We altogether too often don't cross all of the multi-level security pieces that we need to do to be successful, and we end up either double paying or recognizing too late that we've got a problem that we need to solve, and it ends up costing us more money than it should to solve that problem. I think we're doing a much better job of that, trying to close that by ensuring that we have inside our own house more members of the team more broadly read in to those classified programs to be able to see where the synergies are, again, across pillars, across stovepipes, even within just the N98 portfolio. That's been a challenge. The flip side of that is classified programs are only as secure as the number of people who can keep the secrets that are associated with them. So the more information you're putting on any network, the more people you have read into that, the more challenging it becomes to make sure that that information isn't compromised. So that is an incredible balance that our team has to go through to make sure that we keep the right amount of need to know and the right amount of don't slow things down too much.
Roger that, sir. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us. A very special thanks, of course, to Admiral Harris. I think we could have kept this conversation going for quite some time. Obviously, we don't have time this morning, but hopefully we'll see you again very soon, sir. And thank you to General Dynamics for their support. We now have a few closing words from Navy League National Executive Director Mike Stevens.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Luke, and terrific job. Just proud to have you leading our Legislative Affairs Department here at the Navy League. And again, thank you to Admiral Harris for spending time with the Navy League and all of our members and participants in today's program. Thank you, sir, for speaking with us. We hope that you can all join us on April 6th for our next special topic breakfast, which will feature Vice Admiral Jeffrey Trussler. He is the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare. So we look forward to seeing everybody next time. You have a wonderful day and a terrific week.